Israel is now an international pariah. It is totally isolated. I note that there were only two governments that openly condoned the Israeli attack on Iran, the United States and the United Kingdom. Everyone else either tutted or openly condemned this attack.
This was the American Ambassador Chas Freeman, a welcome guest on my channel. With him, we will be venturing into some of the most volatile and unsettling regions of today's geopolitical landscape. Welcome back to Solcube Analytics, where we challenge mainstream narratives and dive deep into global events. I'm Thomas Karat, your host, presenting weekly insights from recognized thought leaders like diplomats, academics, intelligence experts, and sometimes, like today, activists of some sort. So join us as we uncover the hidden stories beneath the headlines. You can find us on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, TikTok, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any of your other preferred podcast platforms. If we pause just for a moment to look at the recent headlines, it's impossible not to sense a profound intensification, a hardening of stance, almost a march of inevitability, particularly around the actions and strategies emanating from Israel. The recent escalations involving attacks on Iranian, Lebanese, and Syrian territories, coupled with Israel's record of political assassinations, paint a picture of uncompromising aggression. The numbers alone, as you will hear, reportedly around 3,000 targeted killings, would give anyone pause. But the impact isn't in the statistics, it's in the ripple effect, a wave that resonates well beyond the Middle East. Ambassador Freeman has long warned of a strategic reckoning looming on Israel's path. With his decades of experience at the highest level of diplomacy and a profound understanding of the Middle Eastern mosaic, he brings a perspective that challenges us to ask the uncomfortable. What are the unintended consequences or the blowbacks? What indeed does it mean for Israel, for its neighbors, and perhaps even for its own survival, when one path of resistance hardens into another? When nations feel backed into a corner, when strategies become reflexes, even at the risk of alienating allies? Ambassador Freeman doesn't just critique, he sees the long game, one that looks both forward and back, a game that, he argues, may be leading Israel not towards security, but into a quagmire of isolation and perpetual conflict. So here is a question to set the stage for our conversation. In a world where power has rarely been more concentrated and where survival often depends on rethinking old ways, is Israel's relentless application of military might securing its future, or is it scripting a future it might come to deeply regret? But before we do, a quick call to action. Some of the best interviews on this channel are shadow banned, which means YouTube is not presenting them to you, the viewer. The latest example is my interview with James Bamford, where we discuss the truly amazing story that underlies Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption scandal. Did you know that a Hollywood billionaire not only stole nuclear secrets from America, but then sold them to Israel, and that Netanyahu helped him to stay out of troubles to this very day? And then Netanyahu turned around and started to ask for favors, hence the bribery charges in Israel against him. Other examples are the interviews with the so-called Hamas lawyer Stanley Cohen, or the interview with the former chief of staff of Colin Powell, who told me that the white powder in the test tube that Colin Powell showed the world when he testified at the UN just before the war on Iraq was actually salt. So if you're interested in content that apparently you're not supposed to see, content that goes against the mainstream narrative, have a look at some of the previous interviews that we have recorded for your pleasure. And of course, it really helps to spread the news if you like and subscribe to this channel. Ambassador Chas Freeman Jr. Please tell me, what's the junior meaning? Where's the junior coming from?
My great-grandfather was Chas Wellman. My father was Charles Freeman, and Chas is short for Charles. So I am the second of Charles Wellman Freeman to come into the world. And there's the Charles Wellman Freeman III, who is my son.
Okay. That explains the whole lineage. Yeah.
Not the
Now,
whole
the
lineage, but
ambassador,
some of it.
some true, some of it. Yeah. The ambassador. So, in the last interview that we had, you said at the end, and it stuck with me, that when we speak, we always speak about negative things, and that you hope that we can speak about something positive. Unfortunately, the events since then again lead us down the way of at least having a critical look at what's really going on. And we could actually start from the backside, so to speak, because one of the things that happened was, of course, that Israel banned UNRWA. Would you like to elaborate what UNRWA actually is and what it does?
The UN Works Agency for Refugees from Palestine was established at the request of Israel after 1948 to take care of the refugees they had created, so they wouldn't have to do so. It was a brilliant move on their part to shove the responsibility on the world. They have now, however, turned against UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency, and banned its activities in areas under their control, which includes all of Palestine, including Gaza. The effect of this will be to accelerate the starvation and death of Palestinians who will no longer have access to humanitarian relief from the international community. This is, in effect, a declaration of war by Israel on the United Nations system and the global community. And I'm hearing more and more voices demand that the international community reciprocate by banning Israel from participation in, for example, the United Nations. This was what was done to South Africa in 1974 over the issue of a much milder form of apartheid. Um, Israel is doing things that South Africans would never have dared to do, and it is getting away with them. So I think this poses a problem for the world. If Israel has divorced the world, what is the world going to do about that?
And it's not the first attempt. The first attempt was a month or two ago, when Israel claimed that UNRWA members were actually members of Hamas or terrorists.
Yeah, this was propaganda which didn't prove out. This is a characteristic lie that the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which is their Hasbara or propaganda agency, routinely levies. So we hear that Hamas, Hezbollah are using civilians to shield themselves and so forth. Well, the fact is, they are a guerrilla movement, they are a resistance, they live among the people, they're not using the people as human shields. In fact, we know now that the use of human shields has been mainly by the Israelis, who will dress Palestinian prisoners in Israeli military uniform and push them ahead down tunnels, or otherwise expose them to hostile fire and use them as bait for the resistance forces. So you can pretty much guess, usually, anything Israel accuses others of doing is probably something it is doing itself.
I saw indeed images of half naked, so they were really undressed till the underwear, group of Palestinians in front of Israeli tanks through the Gaza Strip.
Oh, well, this kind of thing is normal for them. They seek to humiliate their prisoners, often before they kill them. There are mass graves all over Gaza as a result of the depredations of the Israeli Defense Forces, which once laid claim to the title of the world's most moral army, but are now universally recognized as the world's most cruel, vicious, and sadistic army.
I saw an interview yesterday. It was a UN conference, a press conference, where the UN speaker listed a whole rank of things that happened during the last week, and then a journalist asked the speaker from the UN, "Did I overhear this now, or did you mention it, or was there not a UN staff member killed yesterday?" And the speaker from the UN had to admit that it had happened. But what's even more so is, since the outbreak of war, apparently 233 UN staff have been killed. And the reporter pointedly addressed the speaker from the UN for not having even mentioned it anymore. Yeah. So he said, are we now so numb already that if UN personnel is killed by Israel, we don't even mention it anymore? 233. For me, this number was new. I didn't know it. I know there were 170 journalists killed, but I was not aware that 233 members of the UN were already killed.
These are mostly officials, employees of UNRWA, and Israel has shown no respect for the United Nations or the international community, whether it's journalists or officials, humanitarian relief officials. And I note that UNIFIL, which is the peacekeeping force in Lebanon, mounted by the UN, has come under repeated attack from the Israeli invaders of Lebanon. And I know a number of people have been killed and some wounded. This has led some countries which supplied those troops, Ireland and Spain, for example, to boycott Israel. I believe Italy has done the same.
And I believe Israel has demanded the UN to retract its troops from the Lebanese border, right, with Israel.
Well, from Lebanon, basically. This is an extension of Israeli sovereignty into Lebanon, and it's pretty clear that Israel intends to annex everything south of the Litani River, gain access to the water of the river, but turn southern Lebanon into first a free fire zone in which anything that moves can be killed, as has been the case in northern Gaza, and secondly, to settle it with Israeli settlers, making it part of Israel. One of the things that has come out of the heated rhetoric in Israel during this war are statements by religious Zionists to the effect that Israel has a claim to everything, all of Lebanon, part of Syria, part of Turkey, part of Iraq, part of Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, and parts of Egypt. This supposedly having been promised to the children of Abraham by God. But I note that the children of Abraham also include Muslims, and so I wonder how this became an exclusively Zionist right.
The expansion of Israel. I returned about 2 weeks ago from Jordan. I had the chance to interview 4 top diplomats, one of which was the former foreign minister and deputy prime minister, Dr. Marwan Mouasha. All 4 diplomats told me that they are concerned about Israel's expansions and especially of a potential push of the Palestinians into Jordan to make. This is not a new idea. This was floated many times through the last 2 or 3 decades, but they see it as a realistic probability.
Well, Marwan Mouasher, whom you mentioned and whom I know, is a very intelligent, realistic, and moderate person, and he's correct to be concerned. But the concerns in Jordan, as you no doubt detected, are considerably deeper, because in effect, the latest Israeli attack on Iran passed through Jordan, probably had to have had the permission of the Jordanian government, the monarch, the king, to do that. and 60% of Jordanians are Palestinians already. And I think this probably has caused a huge political issue in Jordan, which threatens the longevity of the monarchy and the king's own life. So Israel has been from the beginning a terribly destabilizing force in West Asia, and it continues to be. It is now at war with its native Palestinian population, as well as with the refugees in Gaza. It is at war with Lebanese. It violates the sovereignty of Syria routinely. It has sought to dismember Syria. It is a threat to Jordan. It threatens also Iraq. It appears that the missiles that were fired at Iran were fired from Iraqi's airspace, which is controlled by the United States, despite the fact that Iraq has several times, 3 times, I believe, demanded that the American forces leave. So this is a big mess. It is one in which the United States is complicit. I think there's no question that the installation of theater high-altitude interceptors, the THAAD system in Israel, 2 of the 9 systems that exist in the world are now in Israel, helped to embolden Israel to launch the attack on Iran that it did. And they were probably also, because they provide an American tripwire in Israel, Americans would be killed if Iran attacked them. They provide Israel with a benefit, an incentive that fits into its plan to try to drag the United States into a war with Iran, for the simple reason that Israel has learned 2 important things over the course of the past year. One is that it cannot defend itself without American and British and other foreign support. And even then, it cannot stop an Iranian attack. So it is vulnerable in a way that its hubris had previously made it complacent about. The second thing that Israel has driven home to it is that it cannot hope to effectively attack Iran without the participation of the United States. It certainly cannot do major damage to Iran's nuclear program, which I note is now under pressure inside Iran as a result of Israeli aggression to actually build a bomb. Iran has been very careful not to build a bomb. It has religious scruples about this, and that is to say that there are fatwa or edicts from the religious authorities which declare that weapons of mass destruction are haram or forbidden to Muslims. And therefore, Iran has not built a bomb. But now there is ample reason from a position of realpolitik to do that. And I think it is probably only a matter of time for when Iran's religious scruples give way and it does complete a nuclear arsenal that it can deliver to Israel.
You just said something that probably goes against what 99.9% of all Americans believe. Because in America or in the Western world, yeah, in Iran, those are fundamentalists, fanatics, or almost terrorists. And you said they have scruples for developing a nuclear weapon.
Well, the best proof of that is from the Iran-Iraq war. And by the way, that was initiated by Iraq, not Iran. In that war, Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi army used chemical weapons frequently against Iranian forces. That led to petitions from the Revolutionary Guard in Iran to develop their own chemical weapons in response. And this was denied. This permission was denied on religious grounds, despite the fact that many Iranians died not having a defense against the Iraqi use of these terrible weapons. So religious scruples are entirely real. They may not exist in Israel, but they do exist in its neighbors. And you can look, too, at one other interesting aspect. One of the things that distinguishes the latest exchange of fire between Iran and Israel is that each side was measured in its response to the other. And in the case of Israel, for the first time in living memory, it attacked only military targets. Normally, it has no compunction about killing civilians. In this case, it attacked the early warning radar and air defense systems in western Iran and the missile production facilities, that is, solid fuel mixing plant outside Tehran. The Iranians claim that not much damage was done to either, but one doesn't know whether to believe them or not. In any event, Iran, and for that matter, Hezbollah, have, of course, killed people by accident. So-called collateral damage has occurred, but they have aimed only at military targets up to now. I fear that we are at a moment when the two sides will abandon their restraint, and it's a question of time whether Israel, which seems to believe that it has weakened Iran's air defenses significantly, now follows up with yet another attack, and this time of a more ferocious nature, or whether Iran, which is facing domestic political pressure now to retaliate robustly, does so. And I don't know which will go first. Iran is the next party in terms of tit for tat, but Israel may jump the gun. And there is some reason to believe that Israel's timing will be influenced by the November 5th Tuesday elections in the United States. Probably, in my view, waiting until after the elections, when Mr. Biden, who is weak, susceptible to influence, and pro-Zionist, and has got the United States into a number of wars during his tenure in office, will still be in office, but not facing the political constraints that a continuation in office after January 20th would impose on him. So he might very well fall into the Israeli trap of getting dragged into a war with Iran.
But you said Biden, but Biden is out, right?
Biden is not out yet. He's not out until January 20th. What he is a lame duck. He is disempowered in many respects. He's still the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. He's still the president. The Congress will be out of session. He has a habit of committing U.S. troops without reference to Congress, despite the Constitution. So I'm saying, from Mr. Netanyahu's point of view, given his desire to widen the war and draw the United States into it, he may well see Biden's lame duck status from November 6th to January 20th as an opportunity.
That's a very scary thought, knowing that Netanyahu tried already for the last, 20 years to drag America into a war with Iran. Yes. With all kinds of tricks and mass manipulation and whatnot.
Well, of course, we should recognize, in terms of interference in the American elections and manipulation of the vote, there is no one who is nearly as great a manipulator as Mr. Netanyahu. Israel is the biggest foreign influence in our electoral process, and Mr. Netanyahu directs those efforts to Israel's interests, not those of the United States or his region or the world.
I interviewed, just before this interview, the American investigative journalist James Bamford. I don't know if you know him.
I know him. He's very competent.
He's very competent. With him, I discussed in 2016, the whole American mainstream media was about Russiagate, which in the end was a storm in the water glass. But underneath that, there was actually interference of a foreign state into the US election, but it was not Russia, it was Israel.
Yes, that is correct. And I think the Russians, of course, tried to influence the election. They were not effective at all. There's no evidence that whatever they did had any effect. There is a great deal of evidence that what Israel does has a lot of effect. They, particularly AIPAC and other elements of the Israel lobby, Zionist lobby really, routinely either support candidates with large amounts of money or finance their opponents with a view to defeating them. And interestingly, in the recent electoral election process, the Zionist lobby has not really supported anybody who is favorable to Israel on a great scale. It has concentrated its efforts on doing in those who oppose Israeli policy. So it is now entirely negative rather than positive and in a very defensive mode. Why is that? Because a great majority of the American people now oppose arms sales to Israel, involvement in Israel's genocidal activities, and consider that it's time to break ranks with Israel on its behavior in West Asia. That is quite different, I might say, from the status of American Jews. All the polls show that they are the most admired single religious group in the United States, admired for their generosity to public charity, for their demeanor, for their community spirit. They are not admired, however, to the extent that they support the activities of Israel. And Israel has placed them in some jeopardy by destroying its own reputation in a way that rubs off to some extent on its foreign Jewish supporters. So this is a very complicated situation, but the unregistered Zionist lobby, which acts at the direction of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel, continues to intervene in a very effective and vigorous manner in American elections. That is not true of Russia, much as it might want to interfere, nor is it true of China, which is also routinely accused of this. And we don't accuse India, I notice, although sometimes they have an influence too, given the very large Indian American population. But Israel is unique in being exempt from public mention or retribution for its interference in our electoral process.
James describes this a bit more specific. So apparently there were secret interactions between the Trump team and Israel. And Trump promised a couple of things, which in retrospect he then delivered, like moving the embassy, or the embassy move he already promised before, yeah? But recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal capital, he delivered after. He also delivered on getting out of the nuclear contract with Iran. And then we have, of course, and this is now I'm jumping now from 2016 to now. We can see today similar things very openly. The widow of Sheldon Adelson, Miriam Adelson, right, donated, what was it, 100 million to the Trump campaign.
In return for promised favors to Israel. Yes, this is a bribe. That is the problem with our electoral process now. We have a whole class of people called lobbyists who are professional bribers of politicians and officials. Licensed bribery is a major factor in our political process. And one of the main practitioners of it is the Zionist lobby and Jewish plutocrats like Mrs. Adelson. But she's not the only one by any means. 75% of donations to the Democratic Party are from such people. This is why Kamala Harris, whatever her feelings may be about the anguish of the Palestinians, has not broken with the Biden policies, which I should note that Mr. Biden, the outgoing president, is the largest single recipient of Zionist contributions now active in our politics. So what has been bought for and paid for is delivered.
To briefly return to Iran, as I said, I was in Jordan. I was not in Jordan when the Israel attack on Iran happened, but when Iran shot rockets on Israel. We were sitting in a restaurant, and suddenly the son of a friend of mine called, "Mother, the house is shaking." We didn't know what was going on. The news came about 10 minutes later. Half of the population of Amman were on the roofs, looking at the rockets. But what struck me most was the reaction from the population, because it was really mixed. So there was some cheering, but by far the most prevalent emotion was, I don't want to say it fear, but deep concern is probably the right description. Please.
Of course, the cruise missiles and the drones, as opposed to the extra atmospheric ballistic missiles, had to transit through Jordanian airspace. This was a violation of Jordan's sovereignty by Iran. And I suppose many Jordanians resented that. They also resent the fact that they are sitting in between Iran and Israel, and both sides are shooting through them or at them. But on the other hand, most of them are Palestinian origin, and they sympathize greatly with the suffering of their fellow Palestinians who are under Israeli oppression.
They're very close. I mean, virtually you could feel the impact of the rockets, and there were impacts. We watched till I think 3 o'clock in the morning. We watched Arab news. Yeah, we got from all kinds of direction short videos. So there were definitely impacts. They were not aiming at the centers, at population centers, right? With the exception of apparently the Mossad HQ, which was not hit, but there was a rocket somewhere in the periphery.
Quite close. No, they aimed clearly at military targets. It's apparent from satellite photography that they did some significant damage to the air base in the Negev that houses F-35s. The hangars were struck. The first attack in April, they showed the precision of their targeting by striking the officers' club swimming pool there. This time they struck the hangars and other buildings, which they had clearly identified with their own intelligence. They also struck an air base to the north of south of Haifa, to the north of Tel Aviv, which is also a base from which attacks on other countries have occurred. And they aimed clearly at the Mossad headquarters. They missed it. They hit the road outside it. But they were clearly aiming only at military targets. And I note that Hezbollah recently gave a warning to 25 settlements in northern Israel, saying, up to now, we have not fired at you because you are civilians, but you now house deployed Israeli troops and installations. That makes you military targets. We advise you to evacuate. Get out before we strike. So I think there's been an odd inversion here. Israel, which claims to be part of the West, which is backed by the collective West, ignores international law and the very conventions that were passed after World War II to preclude genocide and other activities from which the ancestors of many Israelis suffered. But the opponents, the enemies, the Arabs, the Iranians, have respected international law as best they could and sought to minimize civilian casualties. So this goes back to whether there are religious scruples or not. There are. There are strong injunctions in the Holy Quran against the murder of civilians. And so this has been respected, I think, for the most part. I think Hamas is a different matter, although it's a matter of dispute whether it was Hamas or other Palestinians who took advantage of the breakout from Gaza on October 7th, who committed the grossest atrocities. There were many atrocities against Israeli civilians. I think Hamas was aiming explicitly at taking military targets and taking military hostages. Others took civilian hostages and apparently killed some. But of course, we know, despite the misleading language that is used, that about half of the Israelis who died on that day were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces, either by accident or in accordance with the so-called Hannibal Directive, which seeks to prevent any Israeli from being taken hostage and becoming the subject of bargaining with the Arab resistance.
So to spell it out for viewers who are not familiar. So what you're saying is the Hannibal Directive is a directive that states so any Israeli should rather be killed than being caught and held as captives.
It's the rules of engagement that are given to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, that when a hostage taking is in progress, they should kill the Israeli hostage, as well as the captor of the hostage, because Israel does not want to be put in a position, which it has been, of having to bargain and release its own hostages in return for the hostages that Palestinians have taken. And I think here there's another point which is quite relevant, and that is that Israel is very casualty averse. It is not a society that is inured to pain and suffering. It has taught all of its neighbors how to put up with such pain and suffering. And perhaps Islam itself is a strength in that it is fatalistic, and it also recognizes martyrdom as something that God favors. So the Arab enemies of Israel, I don't know about the Iranians, but the Arab enemies of Israel in any event are prepared to accept a great deal of pain and suffering and remain resolute. It's not clear that Israelis are. And this is one of the questions that arises from the ground operations in southern Lebanon, where casualties are quite considerable on the Israeli side. There's a question, obviously reflected in a virtual rebellion of the Israeli military and intelligence apparatus against the perpetual warfare advocated by the Netanyahu cabinet and the expansion that it is trying to carry off in Gaza and in southern Lebanon. And that is, how long can Israel put up with this war? Its economy is in tatters. Its people are divided. The hostage families are distressed. Those losing their sons and brothers to combat in Lebanon and in Gaza, where the wars continue. I mean, Hamas is not defeated. Hezbollah is far from defeated. This is very distressing to ordinary Israelis, many of whom have either emigrated or are contemplating emigration. There was an interesting poll in Ma'ariv, which is a well-known Israeli newspaper, which said that 60% of those Israelis who had been displaced from northern Israel by the skirmishing between Hezbollah and Israel before the war began there don't intend to return, don't want to go back. Where will they go? They've been housed in hotels elsewhere in Israel, but I think many of them will simply leave Israel. And the Israel's great claim to greatest boast, really, fully justified, has been that it is the incubator for a lot of technological advances and startups. And these have now left Israel. There have been 60,000 small business bankruptcies in Israel. I don't know how many of them or startups, but the startups are no longer being financed in Israel. They are moving offshore. So this will be the gain. This will be New Jersey and New York's gain and Israel's loss. Southern California too, I expect, and maybe Silicon Valley, and possibly Austin, Texas, maybe Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts. But Israel's loss is significant. And many people in Israel now question the sanity of the Netanyahu strategy, if you can dignify it with the word strategy. It doesn't seem to have any achievable objectives. Therefore, it can't be a strategy.
Are you saying that there is a, or shall I say this? I don't want to say a revolution from the Israeli army, but other sentiments within the Israeli army that are opposed to this right-wing government of Netanyahu? I mean,
Yes,
seriously.
very definitely. And in fact, this is reflected in Netanyahu's frictions with Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister, but also with the high command. And I understand that about 20% of Israeli reservists now decline to accept, to answer the call to service. Whether they're doing that because they are nauseated by what they have been asked to do, killing civilians. I imagine many of them are very decent people who, in fact, suffer by having to make the Palestinians treat them like animals, as they have done. But some of them may just be fatigued. And many of them may not believe in this war. And some of them may be concerned that after the war, given the fact that the International Criminal Court has been provided with detailed dossiers on 1,500 of them committing war crimes, they may be concerned about what happens after the war. I don't know. But the fact is that this is a society which, not surprisingly, is under stress. It has been under stress since October 7th, when it was shocked, rightly so, by the atrocities that accompanied the Hamas breakout from Gaza. And it has been continually shocked by casualties, even though, for the most part, with the exception of the small videos that soldiers have sent home depicting themselves committing war crimes, most Israelis are unaware, or appear to be unaware, or wish to be unaware, like good Germans in the Nazi era, that atrocities are being committed in their name. So I think, the world has come to a simple conclusion. If you talk like a Nazi, if you act like a Nazi, you are a Nazi, or you might as well be a Nazi. And this is why this stain on the state of Israel's reputation will not easily wash off after this is over.
Al Jazeera identified more than 2,000 social media accounts which are focusing on the distribution of those films that the members of the IDF themselves filmed, and many of which account are under international law to war crimes. Now that puzzles me because it reminds me really on Nazi Germany. They also documented everything in the absolute belief that they will be winning, not realizing that in retrospect some of them were hanged because of this evidence. Now, I'm not going to say anyone will be hanged when this war is over, but coming back to the soldiers, you said 20% don't want to join the army anymore. I mean, social media that distort an image. Yeah, you're very quickly in a bubble where you get more or less the same content all the time, and then you think the whole world looks like that. But from what is widely distributed on social media, it seems that at least quite a substantial part of the young soldiers, what is the average age, somewhere between 19 and 20, yeah, are really committing war crimes, atrocities, and they're doing so smiling and singing and dancing and pushing the button, and whole neighborhoods blow up. Or yeah,
I think this, especially because this is shown to the world live by the soldiers themselves, This is distinguished from the behavior of the Nazis in World War II. They tried to conceal their crimes from the outside world. They were Germans. They were meticulous, therefore, in recording what they had done. That is correct. But the Israelis have no shame at all. They are openly doing these things, boasting of them. They are openly calling for genocide repeatedly. I mean, there's no question about members of the cabinet and what they've said. And as you say, all this is done as a kind of joyous, vindictive vengeance on all Palestinians, not Hamas. The word Hamas is used by Mr. Netanyahu and others in the Israeli government as a synonym for all Palestinians. That is why they said at the outset, they are all guilty. All Palestinians are equivalent to Hamas. They are all legitimate military targets. This is a theory that the last time we heard this theory, it was from ISIS, from Daesh, the Islamic State, which declared that because in democracies the citizens had supported their army and their army had committed crimes, therefore all citizens of the United States, the Netherlands, and others are guilty and legitimate targets for murder. Now, of course, one of the problems in the case of Israel is that the Israelis have a theory which is completely disproven by history, that if you kill the leader of an organization, the organization will collapse. In return for this, there are some 3,000 documented Israeli murders of political and political military figures in West Asia on the record. And I ask Israeli friends this: if Mr. Netanyahu were killed, if that Hezbollah drone had actually gone through the window of his house when he was there and killed him, would Israel fall apart? Or would Israel be more vengeful, more agitated, more determined to fight than it had been? I think the answer is obvious. And the same answer applies to both Hamas and to Hezbollah. Israel killed Ismail Haniyeh, who was prepared to accept a two-state solution. It got Yahya Sinwar, who was not prepared to accept a two-state solution, as his successor. I think Sinwar's successor will be even more bloody-minded. This is a natural progression. And I don't think in the end, the very cautious, risk-averse Mr. Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, who has been murdered, will be replaced by someone of equal caliber or caution. So Israel is busily institutionalizing the enmity of everybody around it in an effort that can only make Israel, in the long run, untenable as a state. It is laying the groundwork for the disappearance of its own state. And when and if this happens, Mr. Netanyahu will go down in history, as has been said, in the same way that Hitler did. Hitler led Germans down the wrong path. Every German recognizes that this was a terrible error and that they must atone for what he induced them to do. And I think in the future, Israelis will be in the same position with regard to Mr. Netanyahu and the other Yahoos around him.
Are you implying that Netanyahu, same as Hitler did, wants for Israel to go down with him? Should Netanyahu go down?
There's no evidence he doesn't, but he's obviously an extraordinarily egocentric, narcissistic individual who cares only about himself. He's notorious for that, as is his wife. So that is plausible. But I don't think Hitler intended to die in the bunker in Berlin. He wanted to conquer all of Eurasia and resettle it with Germans. Mr. Netanyahu wants to conquer all of West Asia and resettle it with Israelis. I think, or Jews from somewhere. I don't think many American Jews or Jews in Europe are going to find Israel a very attractive place to move to after what they see going on. In fact, in my own country, the bravest, most outspoken critics of Israel are Jews. And I admire them because they have faced terrible pressure from the various Jewish communities to which they belong. But they have had the courage to stand up and speak. I would hope that had the world not been unaware, for the most part, of what Germany was doing in World War II to its Jewish population, Poles, Gypsies, others, liberals, that our parents, our grandparents, would have similarly stood up and objected, and we would have acted to stop it. But the Germans concealed what they were doing, and nobody could believe it. We have no choice but to leave what we see with our own eyes going on in Gaza and in the West Bank.
And we have a never-ending live stream of these kind of atrocities coming on all social media, which especially TikTok for one reason. But that's also at the same time the reason why America tries to ban TikTok.
Of course, that is a very major reason, because the United States at the moment, despite our First Amendment, which was a great ornament of our culture, now prefers to entrust censorship to corporate oligopolies. And TikTok does not work that way. It is not controlled by the sort of algorithms that control X or any of the meta platforms. So, of course, there was a lot of effort made by the Israel lobby to put TikTok out of business. And it's notable that the potential American buyers for it are self-identified Zionists. So,
yeah. Briefly coming back to Iran. So Haniyeh was assassinated on the eve of the inauguration of the new Iranian president in a building, in a signed building under the protection of the state of Iran. And you said it already, two-state solution. Yeah, so he was actually a main negotiator, if not the main negotiator with Israel. And he propagated the two-state solution, which is something that apparently Netanyahu and his government do not want. So two things here. Israel seemingly kills everyone who is in favor of the two-state solution. That's number one. And number two, the new Iranian president was actually seen as a moderate. Now, he may not be a moderate any longer.
well, I think the implications of this are quite wide. To begin with, the the Israeli theory, as I mentioned, that you assassinate a leader and thereby cow the opposition into subjugation is wrong. Second, it's very clear that Israel wants neither coexistence with the Palestinians. It's currently engaged in trying to exterminate or expel them from Palestine, nor does it want peace with its neighbors. What it means by peace is pacification. That means subjugation. It is not comfortable with any state on its border that, unlike that, for example, that does not resemble Jordan in being extremely deferential and cooperative with Israel because it fears Israel. To that end, it has repeatedly attacked Lebanon. It has sought to dismember Syria. It promoted the American regime change operation in Iraq, and it has succeeded in getting the United States to bribe Egypt into peace with it, since we provide an annual subsidy. And now it proposes to change the regime in Iran to ensure that it is without any strategic rival in West Asia. So it is seeking Jewish supremacy in Palestine, the expansion of that supremacy to territories in neighboring countries, and military supremacy, military hegemony, if you will, in West Asia. All of these things are completely contrary to international law, the United Nations Charter as a central exhibit in such law, and a violation of basic human decency. And they risk being reciprocated by those who are the victims of Israeli policy. And that is to say, what Israel does to others, they will do to Israel if they can. So this is a self-fulfilling case of paranoia. Paranoid people are very good at creating enemies. They have enemies, but they make enemies very easily. And we should all remember the advice of Rabbi Hillel, that is, do not do to others what you do not want them to do to yourself. The opposite of the Christian formula, but still a very valid one. And so I think Israel's taking terrible risks. I think these risks are becoming more and more dangerous for it. And you said at the outset that I had remarked that we should find something positive to speak about. West Asia really at the moment doesn't provide many opportunities.
So true. You're living, if I may, you're living in the US, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, yeah? Trump or Harris in a couple of
Well, I
days?
prefer neither of them, but sometimes that's not an easy choice. I think many people, more people than ever before, will probably vote for a third-party candidate in this election, not because they expect that third-party candidate to win, but because they want to register their distaste, their dismay at the choice with which we've been presented. On these issues we have been discussing, that is, the issues in West Asia, they are Tweedledee and Tweedledum. There is no real difference between them. Mr. Biden's policies would resemble Mr. Trump's. The only difference is that Mr. Netanyahu is much more able to manipulate Mr. Trump by playing to his vanity and by bribing him with campaign contributions from his supporters like Mrs. Adelson. Then he is able to do that with Biden. But as I mentioned, Biden is the largest recipient of Zionist largesse among American politicians. And Kamala Harris shows every sign of continuing Biden's policies. She may have more of a heart. She may be more anguished about the suffering of Palestinians, but you can count on her to wring her hands while sitting on them. At least she's wringing her hands, you might argue. Biden is not.
When I approached you at the beginning of the week for this interview, you said, let's wait a couple of days. What did you expect or fear, or how shall I say this?
Well, I was very struck at the beginning of the week by the extreme moderation and reasonableness of the statement by Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. He said, we should neither exaggerate nor underestimate what Israel has done. And he said, I will refer to my government, to the experts in my government, to determine what the appropriate response was. So he did not demonstrate great anger or a determination to retaliate in kind against Israel. He left the door open for restraint. I think what has happened in Iranian politics, rather like Israeli politics, is an upsurge of a desire for vengeance that has affected the policy. I note that the head of the Iranian armed forces has now promised a very painful, robust attack on Israel. And I wonder myself whether there will be any restraint at all in the next round by either side in this conflict. So this is a moment of great danger. But I suspected that the reaction to Ayatollah Khamenei's moderate statement would be anger among the Iranian populace. And here I just finished. I think we should probably bring this painful discussion to a close. I will just note that Mr. Netanyahu and President Biden's objective had been to form an anti-Iranian coalition between Israel and the Gulf Arab states in particular. And they have succeeded in producing the exact opposite. There is about to be a Saudi-Iranian joint military naval exercise, something that would have been unheard of, unthinkable just a few months ago. And the Gulf Arab states, the so-called Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, has declared its neutrality between Israel and Iran and has assured Iran that it will not permit the use of American military facilities on the territory of its members in any attack on Iran. So what we have is the formation of an anti-Israeli coalition embracing Iran and the Arabs. And Mr. Netanyahu has also succeeded in doing something that has not been done for over 1,000 years, and that is uniting Sunni and Shia against the state of Israel. Those differences, which loomed large earlier, have now been submerged in a common desire to deal with the threat to the entire region that Israeli policies and activities represent. So this is an unfortunate result from the point of view of Israel, and it is a grave setback to American policy, as it has been. And it demands a rethinking in both Israel and in the United States. In the United States, we're having an election, and there is, as we've recognized, little reason to expect that the new president, whether it's Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris, will come into office dedicated to reforming American policy. But I think events are going to force a rethinking because the loss of American influence, the damage to American interests that Israel has engineered will force such a rethinking. And I think in Israel too, if Mr. Netanyahu falls and goes to prison as is expected for corruption, I think we will see a rethinking. How much of a rethinking, I don't know, but there will be a rethinking. Israel is now an international pariah. It is totally isolated. I note that there were only two governments that openly condoned the Israeli attack on Iran, the United States and the United Kingdom. Everyone else either tutted or openly condemned this attack. So this is a measure of how isolated Israel has become. And there are countries, as I mentioned, I believe, like Spain and Ireland and Italy, that are into boycotting Israel. There are demands to expel Israel from the United Nations. There are movements even within the EU to label the settlement products as illegal and to ban their import. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of a probably mounting success for the boycott, disinvest, and sanction movement, or BDS movement. So what Israel has been doing is, from the Israeli point of view, should be from the Israeli point of view, entirely counterproductive. And it certainly is counterproductive in terms of both American and European interests.
So you've succeeded to project a silver line of hope on the horizon, Ambassador, at the end of this interview.
Nickel, I think, not silver.
Nickel, yeah, better than nothing, okay. Dear Ambassador, as always, a real pleasure talking to you. I wish you all the best, and we stay in touch.
Thank you, keep well.
Thank you for tuning into SaltCube Analytics. We hope today's episode gave you something to think about and challenged the way you see the world. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe or follow us and leave a review or a comment. Your feedback helps us keep questioning the status quo. For more insights and discussions, follow us on YouTube, Rumble, TikTok, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of your other preferred podcast platforms. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and remember, always look beyond the headlines.